For much of American history, becoming wealthier seemed relatively easy to recognize. A larger paycheck, a bigger home, a growing retirement account. Each milestone offered reassurance that life was moving in the right direction. Today, millions of middle-class families have achieved many of those same milestones. Their homes are worth more than ever before. Their investment portfolios have grown over time. Many earn incomes their parents could scarcely imagine. And yet, ask them a simple question: do you feel financially secure? The answer is often hesitation. Not because they are struggling to survive, not because they have failed, but because something no longer feels the way it used to. Success has become strangely difficult to feel. On paper, they appear wealthier. In everyday life, they feel increasingly cautious. Large purchases are delayed. Retirement plans are reconsidered. Career changes seem riskier. Even family vacations begin with careful calculations instead of excitement. Somewhere along the way, wealth stopped feeling like freedom. Perhaps the most important question is not why Americans have accumulated more assets. Perhaps it is why those assets no longer provide the confidence they once did. To answer that, we first need to understand the growing gap between being wealthy on paper and feeling financially secure in everyday life. At first glance, the numbers tell a reassuring story. Over the past several decades, household wealth in the United States has grown dramatically. Home values have appreciated across many regions. Retirement accounts have benefited from long periods of stock market growth. Median household incomes, measured in nominal dollars, have also increased. By many traditional indicators, today's middle class should feel more prosperous than previous generations. Yet survey after survey reveals a different reality. A large share of Americans describe themselves as financially stressed, even when they own homes, contribute to retirement plans, and earn incomes that would have been considered exceptional a generation ago. This disconnect raises an important question. If wealth has increased, why hasn't financial confidence increased with it? The answer begins with understanding that wealth and cash flow are not the same thing. A family's home may appreciate by hundreds of thousands of dollars over a decade. Their retirement account may steadily grow through employer contributions and market gains. These assets increase net worth, but they do not necessarily increase day-to-day financial flexibility. A family cannot easily use home equity to pay monthly grocery bills without borrowing against their property. Retirement savings are designed for the future, not everyday expenses, and withdrawing them early often comes with financial penalties. In other words, many households are becoming asset-rich while remaining cash flow constrained. This distinction has become increasingly important. Financial confidence is shaped less by total wealth than by the freedom people feel they have in making everyday decisions. Can they change careers without jeopardizing their finances? Can they take time off to care for a family member? Can they help a child through college without sacrificing retirement? Can they absorb an unexpected medical bill without disrupting the household budget? These questions are answered not by net worth, but by liquidity and flexibility. At the same time, essential expenses continue to consume a larger share of monthly income. Housing remains the largest financial commitment for most families. Insurance premiums have climbed in many parts of the country. Healthcare costs continue to grow through higher premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket expenses. Education, childcare, transportation, and property taxes each add another layer of obligation. As these fixed costs expand, they reduce the portion of income that households can freely allocate. The result is subtle but significant. Families may own more valuable assets than ever before, while simultaneously feeling less capable of responding to life's uncertainties. This helps explain why financial anxiety can persist even during periods of economic growth. A rising home value may increase long-term wealth. It does not reduce next month's insurance premium. A larger retirement account offers future security. It does not make today's childcare payment any easier. These realities reshape how people evaluate prosperity. For previous generations, wealth often represented opportunity. It created options. It expanded choices. For many households today, wealth increasingly represents responsibility. A more valuable home also means higher taxes, greater maintenance costs, and often more expensive insurance. A larger investment portfolio brings long-term promise, but immediate obligations continue demanding attention. Perhaps this is why so many middle-class families struggle to reconcile what they see on paper with what they experience every month. The numbers suggest success. Daily life suggests caution, and somewhere between those two realities, confidence begins to erode. To understand how this contradiction unfolds in everyday life, we need to step inside the story of a family that appears comfortably wealthy by almost every measurable standard, yet quietly wonders why prosperity no longer feels the way they expected. David and Melissa had every reason to believe they had made it. They were both in their late 40s, living in a quiet suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. David had spent more than 20 years building a career in commercial engineering. Melissa managed human resources for a regional healthcare company. Together, they earned just over $210,000 a year. Friends often described them as financially successful. Their home, purchased nearly 15 years earlier, had more than doubled in value. Their retirement accounts had steadily grown through years of disciplined contributions. They carried no credit card debt. Their cars were fully paid off. On paper, they were wealthier than either of their parents had ever been. Yet almost every major conversation eventually returned to the same question: can we really afford it? It wasn't a question about groceries or utility bills. It was a question about life. Could David retire before 65? Could Melissa reduce her hours to spend more time with her aging mother? Could they help their youngest son graduate from college without borrowing? Could they finally take the month-long trip across Europe they had talked about for years? Each dream seemed possible, yet each one also carried a financial consequence they found increasingly difficult to ignore. Their financial advisor often reminded them that their net worth had crossed the $1 million mark. It sounded impressive. For a brief moment, hearing the number felt like validation for decades of hard work. Then they returned home. The roof would likely need replacing within a few years. Homeowners' insurance had increased again after severe weather affected neighboring counties. Property taxes had risen as local assessments reflected climbing home values. Healthcare premiums through Melissa's employer increased during annual enrollment. Their oldest daughter had recently welcomed a baby, and David and Melissa wanted to help with childcare expenses. Every new responsibility seemed perfectly reasonable. Together, they quietly transformed the meaning of being financially comfortable. One Saturday afternoon, David opened a spreadsheet he had updated every month for nearly a decade. He entered their latest investment balances, home value, retirement accounts, savings. Everything looked healthy. Then he reviewed monthly expenses, housing-related costs, insurance, medical expenses, utilities, food, transportation, support for aging parents, college assistance. The numbers revealed an uncomfortable truth. Most of their wealth existed in places they couldn't easily use. Their home had become significantly more valuable. Selling it would mean buying another expensive home in the same market. Their retirement savings continued growing. Using them too early would jeopardize the future they had spent decades preparing for. Their investments represented security, not flexibility. Melissa noticed the same pattern from a different perspective. At work, younger employees often assumed she and David had complete financial freedom. They owned a beautiful home. They traveled occasionally. Their children were doing well. From the outside, life appeared almost effortless. She rarely corrected that assumption. She simply smiled. What she never mentioned was how much planning went into maintaining that appearance. Vacations were scheduled around budget projections. Home improvement projects were postponed until investment returns looked favorable. Large purchases required weeks of discussion rather than moments of excitement. Nothing about their lifestyle suggested financial distress. Everything about it reflected financial caution. The strange part was that neither of them remembered feeling this way 20 years earlier. Back then, they had earned far less. Their home was smaller. Their retirement accounts were modest, yet they felt more optimistic, more willing to take risks, more confident that the future would naturally improve if they continued working hard. Now, despite accumulating substantial wealth, every major decision seemed to involve protecting what they had already built. One evening, Melissa looked at an old photo album from their first years together. They laughed at the tiny apartment they had once rented, the used furniture, the unreliable car. They had owned almost nothing, yet they remembered feeling surprisingly free. David closed the album and quietly said something that lingered in the room. "We've spent 20 years becoming wealthier." He paused. "I'm just not sure we've become more free." That observation captures a growing reality for many middle-class Americans. The challenge is no longer simply accumulating wealth. It is understanding why that wealth increasingly feels tied to responsibility instead of possibility. And to answer that question, we need to look beyond individual families and examine the broader economic forces quietly redefining what wealth actually means. David and Melissa's experience is becoming increasingly familiar across the American middle class. The details may differ from one household to another. One family worries about health care. Another worries about college tuition. A third worries about retirement. Yet beneath these individual concerns lies a common structural shift. Wealth has become increasingly concentrated in assets rather than in financial flexibility. For much of the 20th century, wealth and freedom often grew together. A larger paycheck created more room in the monthly budget. A paid-off home reduced financial obligations. Savings accumulated alongside expanding life choices. The relationship felt intuitive. More wealth meant more freedom. Today, that relationship is no longer as straightforward. Much of modern household wealth exists inside assets that are difficult or undesirable to convert into spending power. Home equity is valuable, but accessing it often requires refinancing, borrowing, or selling. Retirement accounts may represent decades of disciplined investing. Yet withdrawing those funds too early can trigger taxes, penalties, and long-term consequences. Even investment portfolios fluctuate with financial markets, making many families reluctant to depend on them for everyday decisions. The result is a subtle transformation. Net worth rises. Financial confidence does not always rise with it. At the same time, the obligations attached to wealth continue expanding. A more valuable home often means higher insurance premiums, larger maintenance expenses, and increasing property taxes. Healthcare costs rarely decline with age. Longer life expectancy means retirement savings must last longer than previous generations expected. Parents increasingly help adult children with college debt, housing, or childcare, while simultaneously supporting aging parents. Economists sometimes describe this as the compression of financial flexibility. The issue is not simply that households have more expenses. It is that many of those expenses have become permanent. A generation ago, discretionary spending represented a larger portion of the household budget. Families could adjust more easily when circumstances changed. Today, a growing share of income is committed before the month even begins. Mortgage payments, insurance, healthcare, utilities, taxes, retirement contributions, education costs, each obligation serves a legitimate purpose. Collectively, they leave less room for experimentation. This has consequences beyond household finances. It changes the way people interact with opportunity itself. Consider career decisions. An employee may dream of launching a small business. The necessary skills are there. The market opportunity exists. But leaving a stable salary also means risking employer-sponsored health insurance, retirement contributions, predictable cash flow, and the ability to meet fixed monthly obligations. The financial risk is no longer measured solely by potential business failure. It is measured by everything that supports the household before the business earns its first dollar. The same dynamic affects geographic mobility. A family may receive an attractive job offer in another state. Years ago, moving represented a fresh opportunity. Today, higher housing costs, elevated mortgage rates, moving expenses, and the possibility of giving up an affordable existing mortgage can make relocation financially irrational. The opportunity still exists. The cost of accepting it has increased. Even retirement has changed. For previous generations, retirement often represented the reward for decades of work. For many households today, retirement has become another complex financial calculation. How long will savings need to last? Will healthcare costs outpace investment returns? Will inflation reduce purchasing power over the next 20 or 30 years? Could one unexpected expense permanently alter the plan? These questions are not signs of pessimism. They reflect a growing awareness that wealth alone no longer guarantees certainty. Perhaps this is the defining characteristic of today's middle class. Families are not necessarily poorer than previous generations. In many cases, they possess greater assets than ever before. Yet those assets increasingly function as responsibilities to preserve rather than opportunities to expand. This distinction changes the emotional meaning of wealth. Instead of asking, "What can this wealth allow us to do?" many households now ask, "How do we make sure we don't lose what we've already built?" That shift, from pursuing opportunity to protecting stability, may be one of the most important economic transformations taking place beneath the surface of modern America. And once wealth becomes something to defend instead of something that creates freedom, its psychological impact begins to change in ways that no balance sheet can fully measure. Most financial transformations do not begin with a crisis. They begin with a habit. Checking account balances more often, waiting a little longer before making a purchase, recalculating retirement projections every few months, reading insurance renewal notices with growing concern. Individually, these behaviors seem ordinary. Together, they reflect something deeper, a growing state of financial vigilance. Unlike financial hardship, vigilance is difficult to recognize from the outside. The mortgage is still paid. The retirement account continues to grow. The family still takes an occasional vacation. Life appears stable, but beneath that stability, a different emotional reality is taking shape. Every major decision carries an invisible calculation, not because families expect disaster, because they have become increasingly aware of how expensive even small mistakes can be. A new car is no longer just a purchase. It may mean higher insurance premiums for years to come. Moving to a larger home is no longer simply an upgrade. It also means higher property taxes, maintenance costs, and utility bills. Changing careers may increase long-term happiness, but it could temporarily interrupt retirement contributions, employer-sponsored health care, or predictable income. Gradually, financial planning shifts from creating opportunity to minimizing risk. This psychological change affects more than money. It reshapes identity. For decades, the American middle class measured success by progress, a promotion, a larger home, a growing family, a new business, retirement by choice. Each milestone suggested that tomorrow would offer more possibilities than today. Now, many households quietly measure success differently, keeping the home, maintaining savings, avoiding major setbacks, preserving what has already been built. These are worthy goals, but they carry a different emotional weight. Progress inspires optimism. Preservation demands constant attention. Perhaps this explains why many financially successful Americans still report feeling anxious about the future. Their concern is not rooted in poverty. It is rooted in uncertainty. They understand how quickly rising healthcare costs, prolonged inflation, unexpected home repairs, or market volatility could alter years of careful planning. This awareness creates a subtle but persistent mental burden. Financial decisions no longer happen occasionally. They become part of everyday thinking. A family dinner becomes a discussion about insurance renewals. A vacation includes conversations about future college expenses. Even receiving a raise often leads to relief that lasts only until the next increase in fixed costs arrives. Over time, this constant awareness changes the emotional meaning of wealth itself. Wealth once represented possibility. Today, for many families, it represents responsibility, not because wealth has lost its value, but because maintaining it now requires continuous attention. And perhaps that is the quiet paradox defining today's American middle class. They have accumulated more than previous generations in many measurable ways. Yet many feel they can afford fewer risks, fewer changes, and fewer moments of financial spontaneity. The challenge is no longer simply becoming successful. It is feeling secure enough to enjoy that success, and that may be one of the most profound and least visible economic shifts taking place in modern America. For generations, wealth represented more than money. It represented confidence. The confidence to change careers without fear, to move when opportunity appeared, to help children build their own futures, to retire knowing that decades of hard work had created genuine freedom. That idea has not disappeared, but it may be evolving. Today, many middle-class Americans possess more wealth than previous generations ever imagined. Their homes are worth more. Their retirement accounts are larger. Their incomes are higher. Yet many describe a future that feels increasingly uncertain, not because they have failed, but because the cost of protecting what they have built continues to grow. Perhaps this is the quiet paradox of modern prosperity. A balance sheet can measure assets. It cannot measure confidence. It cannot calculate the freedom to take a chance, the willingness to embrace change, or the peace of mind that comes from believing tomorrow will be easier than today. Those qualities are harder to quantify, yet they may matter just as much as net worth itself. The American middle class has spent decades building wealth. The question now is whether that wealth still delivers what it once promised. Because if prosperity increasingly requires constant protection instead of creating greater possibility, then the definition of being rich may already be changing. And that change is unfolding not in financial markets, but around millions of ordinary kitchen tables across America.